This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the very niche and kind of geeky details of modern warfare with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to photojournalist CH Gardiner, and he's going to be speaking to us about the protests in Chile. Carson was recently there covering them from the barricades, and he's going to tell us what he's seen. So far, over 20 people have been killed by the government who are trying to crush the protests. They've installed a curfew, they've brought the military out onto the street, and in some cases we've even seen protesters are actually firing back at the police with live rounds. So it looks like things are escalating quite fast, and Carson's going to give us an idea of how this all happened. If you want Popular Front to keep moving forward, if you like what we're doing, please do consider supporting us on the Patreon at patreon.com/popularfront. You've just been in Chile recently reporting on the situation there. Let's go back to the start. Maybe you can explain to people what exactly triggered this and what is happening now, because it's not in the news that much. I don't want to go down the route of saying mainstream media aren't covering this, because they are covering it, but it is being overshadowed a little bit. So yeah, maybe you can go back to the start and maybe explain how this all happened.
So I mean, it's a thing where it's like you said, it is being covered, but I don't think people get the scope of what's going on. It's like every day stuff is happening there. Every day there's protests and confrontations with police, and like it goes back to October 14th when there was a planned protest against a fare increase for the Santiago metro, and essentially what happened is a bunch of students got together and they decided to skip the fare by jumping the turnstiles and like disabling the turnstiles, and then this escalated and a bunch of different stations got shut down, and then over days this kept going on. And then a video came out where the police, the military police that are used in Chile, they shot a young woman in a metro station during one of these protests, and sort of that video went viral. And then like it was like the match, I guess, that set everything off. Like people started going to the street, and then other groups started joining in the protests, and then sort of like this undercurrent of unhappiness at the social and economic situation just sort of was released. And so you had like people from all over the spectrum decided to protest, and it spread outside of Santiago. And with this, the police ended up. You have to understand, it's the same police that they had during the dictatorship. Like this, the Carabineros. Yeah, exactly. They've been around since like the 1920s or something, and they haven't exactly changed their tactics very much since then. So like repression's their immediate reaction to anything. So when the protests spread, the police went into like let's go and beat the shit out of everyone mode, and started trying to shut it down that way. And so on, I believe it was the 24th of October, you had like 1.2 million people go to the street, which is like a crazy amount considering the population is, I think it's just under 20 million. So like a significant portion of the population was gathered in Santiago just to protest. Like there isn't a main set of things that they're protesting about, but it's sort of about the overall economic inequality that's taking place in the country, and sort of the disenfranchisement that's been taking place despite the massive economic gains that have been going on in Chile.
Right. Well, maybe we can talk about that. What are these problems with the economy and the disparity between rich and poor? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because that, like you said, was that was the main reason, and then the turnstile thing was just like the straw. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is, you have to understand that Chile has done exceedingly well as like in just pure economic terms. Like they've had a very liberal economy, and this has allowed them to grow as a nation like exponentially. It's the richest country in South America. But the problem is when you have like these large amounts of economic freedom, and where it does allow for a lot of economic growth, at the same time it leads to inequality. Like in of like the major OECD countries, Chile is the most unequal country in terms of the ratio of rich to poor, and so there's been this ongoing trend that the country's been getting richer, but the people haven't been seeing it. And so I think like it happens every couple, I don't know, every 5 years or so that you start getting protests in Chile where people start getting like upset because they've been promised this economic change that's supposed to like revitalize them, but it doesn't really seem to trickle down to the poorer people. I mean, it seems to just concentrate the wealth in sort of the upper echelons. And so the thing is, like, just pure inequality wouldn't be the only thing that would set it off. I mean, you have in South America, you have more economically unequal countries, like Brazil's ahead of it in terms of economic inequality, Colombia, all these, Ecuador, Bolivia. But the thing with these other countries is that they haven't gone through the same sort of massive economic growth that Chile's been going through. And so when the youth of today were growing up, they were thinking, well, when I'm an adult and when I graduate from college, I'll be able to get a good job, I'll be able to get a good house, and their expectations were X. And what happened in reality is that despite being able to the country improving overall, they've been sort of stuck. And then on top of that, they haven't really been able to take part very, very strongly in the decision making of the country. The Sebastián Piñera presidency is sort of, I guess, a center-right government, but it's this thing is that all the governments that they've had have been sort of center-right, or even the leftist governments that they've had have been not super keen on reforming the system, because overall it's been beneficial for the country. And so the people, even if they do want sort of extreme change, there isn't really an avenue for them to get to it, because most of the politicians that they have are going to be towing the same central line.
Right. Well, that's interesting, because a lot of people, I've spoken to a few people about this. Mostly there's a lot of anarchists there who I've spoken to who just randomly reached out. And then I spoke to like the other side as well before we spoke. And I've spoke to some people there that are like, well, why are they even protesting? Like, we have this incredible growth. Like, what's their problem? But like you said, it's like, yeah, incredible growth for some people, which, to be honest, is going to make you even more mad if you see that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Martin Luther King said that a riot's the voice of the unheard, and I think that's essentially what it is in Chile. Is that you have this large population that is just not being heard by the government, and like they've been doing this work to improve themselves, and it just hasn't really been getting them anywhere. And like to your point, where there's some people that are saying that they don't really understand why these people are protesting if it's going economically so well. And I've spoken to some Venezuelan refugees that were living in Santiago, and it must have been a shit situation for them, because they just managed to escape like the hellhole that's Venezuela right now. And then they were saying they didn't really understand why the people were protesting so much, but at the same time that it was good that they were willing to do it, that they were willing to go into the street, and that they were willing to like put the government into a position where they have to listen, and where they're forcing their voices to be heard.
Right, and one of the, I forget exactly, maybe you can remind me, but there was one demand that the protesters had. I think it was scaling back the fare increase or something like that. That has been met, right? But they're still out on the streets every day. Maybe you can, elaborate on that a bit.
So Sebastián Piñera, he was elected to another term previously, and then in 2010, there was massive student protests back then as well, and so he managed to sort of escape that, but he's been following the same tactics for this set of protests, which is basically like he's fired his entire staff. He's basically said that I'm going to give in to the demands, and then he alternates, and then he switches that the protesters are the enemy, and so he's sort of he's doing whatever he can to stay in power. The big thing that protesters have been wanting is for an update to the Constitution. The Constitution is the same one that they've had since the Pinochet dictatorship, and so the idea of rights aren't exactly in concrete, let's say, in their constitution. And so the government said, okay, we'll have a referendum on the constitution. We'll get all the politicians together and we'll decide on what changes that there should be made, and then we'll bring it to a plebiscite to the people. And the people were like, no, fuck that. That's just going to be putting more corrupt politicians in charge of deciding what rights that we get. And so Piñera has been willing to make concessions, but only because his back's against the wall. And like, I've spoken to people that have worked with him, and basically what they've said is that he's so enamored with the idea of being president that he'll do whatever it takes to stay in power. He has like a 12% approval rating right now, which is like crazy low. But he has like, it seems to be that the only thing that will actually help to solve the situation would be him renouncing, and it doesn't look like he's going to be willing to do that. And then on top of that, you have like the extreme violence that's taking place on the hands of the police, which is causing the protesters to become more willing to escalate themselves and to become more staunch in their views of what they want to be accomplished. And a lot of that is stuff that the government's just willing not to give.
Right, well, let's talk about the protests, actually, because you're one of the journalists who's been there on the ground, on the barricades. Maybe you can explain what it's like there, the makeup of the protesters, what kind of tactics, because from what I've seen, this is not their first kind of protest, as we know, but you know what I mean? It's like they're really quite advanced. They know what they're doing. And, I don't know, maybe you can tell us about that.
So I've been to sort of like riots or protests, I guess, in like a few countries. And like Chile is the most organized group of people I've seen at protesting ever. Like when I was there, it was like, it was kind of like medieval warfare, the way they have it set up. They have like, when you get there, so basically the protests happen every day in Santiago in Plaza Italia, which is like this big giant square in the middle, where I'm sure like everyone's seen the photos of the guys waving the flags on top of the statue. But anyway, so everyone gets there, and then there's like the big group of regular protesters, which are just like families and whatever. And then like at a certain time, the police show up, and then that's where like the hardcore, I guess you would call black bloc protesters, like are there to like engage with the police. And so in sort of a medieval fashion, they have like a front line that's just guys with like shields that are like made out of fucking anything that they can get their hands on. I saw one guy like holding a sink turned sideways as like a shield, and they form
a sink.
Yeah, he had like a sink with like the handle being like the faucet. It was pretty cool. And then, so they have like the front line set up there that are like shielding the guys, and then the guys just one line behind them are throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails. And then behind that, you have like an industry of people that are like breaking up the sidewalks and then like forming human chains to ferry the rocks to the front so that they can throw them at the cops. And then behind that, you have people with lasers that are sort of standing on top of just elevated positions, and then shining those lasers at the armored vehicles that are spraying waters to try and blind the drivers and the guys shooting the water cannons and stuff like that. And so like there's like a system to how they have it set up. And so like this has meant that they can actively engage with the police and make the police often retreat. Like the last day that I was there, the police were like, all right, we're not going to let anyone gather at the square. We'll go and set up at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon before everyone gets there. And then if anyone tries to set up, we'll start gassing them and shooting them with non-lethal rounds. And so they held this position. They had like a bunch of reinforcers coming in and like staying static on this central square. And then like somehow the protesters managed to, I guess, push from multiple sides to the point that the police had to pull back. And like eventually the protesters were pushed out of the square, but like they were able to retake it 3 or so times. And like if you think about the amount of resources that the state has, the amount of tear gas, the armored vehicles that they have, they've recently started using tanks in the square. Like it's pretty impressive just like how
actual tanks or the armored personnel carriers.
No, like actual tanks. So basically what happened is the police there, they have these 2 trucks that spray water, that are like just water cannon trucks. and one of them ended up overheating, and the cabin caught on fire, and so it was out of service. So what they had to do, what the police did and the military did, is they called in the army, who brought in like these small, like actual tanks, and they're trying to use them, I guess, to like herd the protesters in certain directions. But like it seems like they're sort of grasping at straws to try and contain a situation that just doesn't want to be contained.
Right, but they immediately brought in the army, right? Like it was what, like 2 or 3 days before the military came in, and there was a curfew as well.
Yeah, so there was a curfew in several cities directly after things started taking off, and I think that was sort of like Piñera's overreaction, thinking like, well, I'm just gonna like try and shut this down with force, you know. And so like there were these curfews, and the military was called in. But the thing is that I think it's important to note is that the main police force that has been combating the protesters is like a military police, and that it's like it's a police force with a military structure, and that in the event of a state of emergency, like what happened in the first few days, they become activated and become part of the armed forces before being returned to being just police. And the issue with this is that when there's in every country that I've been to that has had like a military police force, is that they're trained to basically wage combat, and then if they're doing a policing role, then they're going to try to wage combat on the civilians of their own country. I've seen it like in Brazil. I've seen and in Chile. It's become very apparent that that's what they're relying on to try and maintain the situation. So the military being called in and the curfews in the first few days were like an overreaction on Sebastián Piñera's part, but at the same time, it just made everything worse because like people refuse to live under a dictatorship. They've had that for so many years, where thousands of people were disappeared and were killed, and so like the youth that are there nowadays and the people that remember the dictatorship are just like refusing to be silenced, independent of how much force the government is willing to use.
Right, and in terms of force, they've started using live rounds. They've killed how many protesters? Someone said to me it's like over 100.
So the official count is 26.
Okay, well they're not quite 100 then.
But the thing is, you have to keep in mind that like there are people that have died that they haven't officially like associated with the protests, although they are most likely being caused because of the protests. Like there's people that will show up in the hospital that have been beating with like fractured skulls, and they won't associate that directly with the police, but it seems like there's a high probability of it being like that. The major issue with the violence that I've seen is that the police are using basically they're non-lethal rounds. They're what they are is like a metal ball that's encapsulated in rubber, and then the idea is that you shoot it at a protester that's like 20 meters away, and it hurts like a motherfucker, and then they'll stop advancing or whatever. But the police in Chile have decided that they're going to basically aim for people's heads. So you have like 200 people's eyes have been essentially just shot out. There was a kid that was there when I was there that he had both his eyes shot out in like the same protest, and he's like 20 years old. He's gonna be blind for the rest of his life. And like so when I was on the first day that I was there, I was photographing the police, and then the police bum rushed a bunch of protesters, and then the protesters scattered, and a group went down the side street, and I guess this one guy ended up getting ambushed, and he got shot like 5 times, I think it was, and I came across him as I was like trying to find a way of not getting shot. And when I took him to the hospital with some other people, and when I got to the hospital, even though he'd been shot 5 times by these non-lethal bullets, like they had to put him in the waiting room because there was so many other injuries. And it should be noted that like the non-lethal rounds, despite being called that, are like the range that they're being shot at, they penetrate into the skin, and they leave like the little musket ball type thing underneath the skin and underneath the flesh, and it stays inside people. And so this guy had 5 what were essentially like marbles stuck inside of him, but he wasn't considered a high priority because like he wasn't going to lose a limb and he wasn't going to die. And so like this is the type of violence that is common. Like that's not even like an exceptional story. There's like cases of protesters saying that they were raped by the police, that there's cases of protesters being beaten to the point that they've died.
I've been putting some of the footage on the Popular Front Instagram, specifically from Chile, and there's just like no end of people sending me videos from police brutality. And what's a little bit different, you know, that I've noticed from this is that the police seem to be very open about the brutality. It's almost like they want you to see. You know what I mean? I don't know. Did you get that impression?
So it's like they still have that dictatorship mentality, you know, where it's
right,
like we're protected. Tough. Yeah, we're protected by the government, and so the way that we're going to make people stop protesting is by basically beating the shit out of them or shooting them with rubber bullets. Like I had the police shoot at me like 3 times with the non-lethal rounds, and they hit me twice with them. And like when I was photographing off to the side, I wasn't like one of the times I was like the first person that was shot so like they were like not targeting the main group of people and accidentally hit me. It seems like that they were going out of their way to target a journalist, I guess. And so like there's this sort of willingness to just like be very obvious about it, you know, that you don't see in a lot of other places. I mean, most other places will try to justify it as being in like self-defense, whereas it's sort of a very brazenly aggressive tactic in Chile.
And which units are using the live rounds? Like you said, what 26, 28, I forget. That many people have been killed. I know they haven't all been killed by live rounds, but I know some of them definitely have been killed by the live rounds. Like, who is that the military or is that the police?
So that's the first case was the carabineros, the police. Like the thing is,
it's like a paramilitary.
Yeah, it's like. Yeah, it's essentially a paramilitary. Like, it's like instead of having police where they're civilians, it's like the police are military, and so they have a military discipline structure, rank structure, and so this sort of imposes like a high level of authoritarianism to their own structure, which I think they try to impose on the population. And so, like, of those 26 that are officially dead, I don't know exactly how many are like officially killed by police, but like there's also the like people that haven't directly been killed by them, but have been killed by like the police have fired smoke grenades into an enclosed building, and then the buildings burned down and people have died inside of there, like stuff like that. So the direct correlation between like the number of official security forces that have been responsible for killing people and then like the amount of people that are dead is hard to figure out right now.
Right, and also I've seen footage where protesters are firing back, and I don't mean Molotovs, I mean shooting guns. Like there's actual police body cam footage of protesters. Just you can kind of see them in the distance, and then you just hear pop pop pop, and then protesters are firing back. Did you see any of the guns on the protesters?
So I didn't see any of that personally. I saw the video I think that you're talking about, and like that definitely does sound like incoming rounds, but that was in like that wasn't in downtown Santiago. That was in sort of a rural area, and like I didn't see any firearms when I was there. I know that some of the protesters have been other people have told me basically that they carry like BB guns to fire at the police, but I haven't seen anyone use any of the protesters using live rounds. But I think if there's definitely like an extreme element that if they had the ability to have access to firearms, they would potentially use them.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm quite interested in with the Chile situation, because for years I've been following like militant guerrilla groups and what have you, and there is quite a serious hardcore anarchist militant group and groups in Chile. Like, for example, before these protests kicked off, the students were really starting to go mad at some of the universities. I forget what it was about, but they were running around with like cratefuls of Molotovs, like very militant and, like proper old school anarchist type stuff. So, I mean, I can't see it getting any better. Like, I think there's certain groups, I guess I'm saying, that are certainly ready for taking things up a notch, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the violence that they've been exposed to has made them more willing to respond with violence, and then this is sort of like creates a feedback loop with the police more willing to use violence against them, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon. I mean, like if the main thing that's stopping that right now, I don't think is like lack of will. I think it's lack of munition, honestly. Like if the protesters had access to firearms, that I wouldn't be surprised if they would be willing to, if a group of them would be willing to use it. And there's definitely more extreme elements. There's like degrees, I guess, with like everything. Like within the protesters, there are more extreme elements that definitely do want to cause significant harm to police. I ended up getting at one point I was photographing when the police basically bum rushed the square and pushed the protesters back, and then I was photographing the police. And due to the high number of like undercover cops and that have been infiltrating protesters, I guess that they assumed because I was on the side where the police were that I was either like an undercover cop or I was some way affiliated with them. And then I had like some dude run up and throw like a giant stone at me. And so like I think there's like a definite will to like cause harm on certain parts of the protesters. But I mean, as to whether or not that's justified or not, I mean, the police are definitely the sort of instigating violence. It's not that the protesters are. It's not that the protesters that are going in and attacking for the police at the start. It's that like every day at a certain time, the police show up and start blasting the entire square with water cannons, start shooting the rubber bullets. They start shooting tear gas. I mean, I got shot by the police with a tear gas canister too in the back. The rubber bullets, like I said, like they keep saying that they're going to stop allowing them from the police force from using them. I've heard this 3 separate times. The commander of the police saying this, and then like the police forces keep using them. They did like an analysis on the bullets, and like they were like surprised that there was metal in it. Like I guess there's not supposed to be metal, but like anyone that's been on the street would know that. And then on top of that, there's apparently lead in the metal, so it could end up like poisoning the people that have been shot with them as well.
Right, and also it's basically a bullet.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's shot out of regular shotguns. Exactly. And so I mean, I don't want to get into like if there's like a justified need for escalation and violence, but I definitely think that like the way that the government forces have responded has not helped defuse the situation.
Yeah, and I don't even know if as journalists it's anything to do with us. Like, are we like, so what if, if we say, oh well, that wasn't justified, or that was like, so fucking what? Like, it's not up to us to say, it's very easy for Westerners specifically to be like, well, I was in favor of them until they attacked that police officer. Well, like, cool, you're living nice, like you're safe. You don't know what it's like, And personally, I believe that, against kind of infringing authoritarianism, physical violence, you have to do it sometimes. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's a tool that has to be used at times. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we've seen throughout history, it's not nice. And then a lot of Westerners will be like, well, they did this. Well, sorry that the conflict isn't going exactly as you wanted it, It's like a lot of the perception is based on, can I support this? Well, I hope they act in a way that means it feels good for me to support them. And it's like, there's nothing to do with you, Like, it's, like you said, it's not really our place. It is what it is. They're getting killed. and they feel it's necessary to resort to violence, and it's not good. But life isn't always nice. You know what I mean?
Well, exactly. I think it's become too easy for I guess I don't know outsiders to say, well, this is what you should do with your country. When at the same time, like civilization's been built off the back of revolutions and basically blood. And so like I don't think it's I don't like to comment on whether or not I think violence is justified. I think like if you're going in there as a journalist, you need to be an observer in most cases, and I just I hope that it manages to get resolved without breaking into large scale civil conflict.
Exactly. Like, yeah, exactly. That's the thing. It's like, hopefully there isn't violence. Hopefully it can pan out without that. But, sometimes it does. Where do you see it going from here? You've been on the ground and you've spoken to the protesters. I know you've kind of hinted that you think it's going to get worse, but like a few things have happened recently. What do you reckon?
So the thing is, like the main thing that could have stopped this like a month ago is if Piñera had resigned, and like he doesn't want to do that. So since then it's just escalated, and the violence has become more intense. The protesters have become more ingrained. Like the concessions that they were originally asking for, like even if they do get met, I don't think it's likely that a lot of people will be willing to stop going to the street, because things haven't really changed. And like you said, they've protested a lot in the past, and like the system still maintains itself. It seems to perpetuate regardless of what concessions are made. So I don't think that it's likely that it's going to end anytime soon. Do I think it's going to escalate into like large scale civil violence? I think that's probably unlikely too, because I mean, society as a whole tends to function. Like, it's not a situation where in like Bolivia, where it's half the population against half the population. It's like 80% of the population is against the government, against what the government policies and the inequality, and then like 12% are in favor of it, and then the remainder just like can't be bothered. So I don't think there's enough of like two sides for to go into large scale conflict. I think what could end up happening is it drags out to the next election. The next election takes place, and then that sort of resolves it, or an early election is called, or something along those lines. I don't, like I said, I don't think that there's enough of I think that the population is so united behind this that it doesn't seem like there's going to be like a civil war breaking out or something like that.
Right, it's going to be, well, possibly, but the people against the government as opposed to against each other.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, like the way that they got rid of Pinochet was sort of through protesting, and it was relatively unbloody, and he sort of was phased out. So I mean, they're used to getting rid of authoritarian governments through sort of, I guess, social action. But at the same time, like, you have a government that doesn't want to relent. I mean, you have a police force that probably really doesn't want to get held accountable for what's happening. I mean, I suppose there's a possibility of authoritarian elements within the government trying to take control and trying to reinstitute sort of a dictatorship type situation. But at the same time, like as you can see by the amount of people on the street and their willingness to escalate despite facing losing their eyes or getting killed, I don't think that the Chileans are going to take that very easily.
Yeah, I know you said there's no real kind of this is an anti-whatever protest, but when you're on the ground and you're talking to protesters, what is the main thing that they're saying?
So they talk a lot about the inequality and also about just like not having their voices heard by the government. They feel that like no, regardless of what happens, they're never going to be able to move up in the world. Their economic and social status is going to remain despite going to universities. The amount of So Chile has easy access to credit, which is generally a good thing, but at the same time, they've used this as a tool to sort of, I guess, to keep control of the population to a certain degree. Because if you go to university, there's very few public universities that are low cost or free. Like if you want to go to a good high school, you generally have to pay for it. Like 50% of the population is going to, or 50% of the schooling population is going to private schooling, and a lot of ways that they pay for this is through debt. And so people are becoming enslaved to the debt, and so even if they do graduate from a good university, they're going to be stuck with this debt. Even if they do manage to get a good job, they're still going to have this debt. And then a lot of the times there is this class segregation, I guess, where when people do graduate, they take on this debt to get a good job. They don't get hired because there's favoritism. There's like a ruling elite that seems to hold all the cards, and they don't really have any method of voicing their discontent except through going to the streets.
Sounds like Britain. But yeah. Unfortunately our youth don't want to go to the streets. They just want to like cry online, but yeah, whatever. All right, man. Is there anything else you think we should cover before we wrap this up?
No, I think that's basically it. I think that you could see a trend of this happening in Latin America. I mean, you see what's happening in Bolivia.
Yeah, some people are calling it like the Latin Spring. I mean, I think that's a bit over the top, but yeah, it seems to be spreading.
I mean, yeah, there's a possibility for it. I mean, it's like Latin America tends to like jump between like far right, far left, far right, far left, and so like maybe it's time for another swing after the far right one previously. So I think it could extend outside of Chile. I don't think it's going to end anytime soon, but it could. I definitely think that the violence could escalate.
Yeah, man. Well, I think you've done a great job covering all this. Where can people find your work and get in touch with you if they want to?
So mostly on my Instagram. It's instagram.com/CH Gardiner, and my YouTube, which is /CH Gardiner, Gardiner as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, spell your name. It's not like Gardner is in like the bushes. It's something else.
Yeah, weird French ancestry, I guess. I'll be posting videos from my time in Chile, and I'm going to be doing a photo book from there as well, and I hope to go back. Amazing,
man. Well, let me know when that photo book is ready, and if you need any help, we'll certainly push it for you.
Awesome. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Cool, man. Thanks very much, mate. That was CH Gardiner speaking about the clashes in Chile and how he thinks things might pan out now that the government doesn't seem to be moving an inch in terms of stepping down as the protests want them to. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us on the Patreon. That's the main way that we stay afloat because we don't have any corporate backing. We've refused a lot of advertising as well due to it just seeming wrong. It just didn't feel like, that's not what Popular Front is about. So yeah, to help us keep going and to get the bonus episodes and access to the Patreon and all kinds of other extras, go to patreon.com/popularfront. This episode also was sponsored by thedefensepost.com. Defense with an S, definitely check them out. They're posting regular updates on the world in conflict. And do check out our youtube.com/popularfront. We've got a new, the first part of the Hong Kong documentary. We were out with the frontliners, me and Luke Pierce, who was filming, and Jack Hazelwood, great field producer. We were out with the frontliners, both on and off the front line of the protests. Part 2 will be coming this week, so by the time this is out, part 2 will be on its way. youtube.com/popularfront. Instagram, you won't be able to find us by searching us because we're shadow banned and there's loads of restrictions on our account because, I don't know, Instagram doesn't realize that, journalism that isn't very boring is not promoting terrorism. It's just different journalism. But yeah, so you have to go to instagram.com/popular.front. Like, you have to search the whole thing because we won't come up because they're censoring us. Boo-hoo, I guess it's been happening for so long now, I should probably stop moaning about it. But yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's twitter.com/Jake_Hanrahan. My surname is spelled Hanrahan. Or the Popular Front Twitter, which is twitter.com/PopularFrontCO. Same as the website, popularfront.co. Everything, basically just go to the website. If you want to tell someone what's Popular Front, www.popularfront.co. Go there, everything, you'll see it all. Yeah. Thank you very much to the following Patreons. Without you, this definitely would not be possible. They are Adam Berg Snyder, Axel Iverson, Azad, Brian McLaughlin, Chad Walker, Christopher Martin, Craig Miller, Dan Dunham, Daniel Shearer, Diana Gorvanek, Eloise Larson, Emiliano, Emily Molly, Fletcher Tate, Frank Austin, Jack Mayhoff, James from the Discord, Joanne Stocker, Joel Tambusi, Josh, Juan Hernandez, Kay Hardy Roberts, Lawrence Abrahams, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself, LH, Lika Madiq, Moody Al Rashid, Noah, Ari from the Discord, Patrick Bronte, Peter McCormack from What Bitcoin Did and Defiance podcast, Q-Ball, Russia Al-Akidi, Rohan Abari, Ryan Sandercock, Scartoon Music, Sebastian from the Discord, Sarushe Hawazi, Stephen Davila, STV, Tom Lochrin, Tony Bin, Vida Provost and Zachary Inch. Thank you very much. Like I said, if you want to support Popular Front, go to patreon.com/popularfront or go to popularfront.co/support. We accept Bitcoin and various other methods there. But yeah, I'm trying to avoid getting any like ridiculous kind of sponsors on here to keep things going. So, you know, the best way is the Patreon so far. Yeah, the intro music was by Home and the outro music is by Sam Black. As usual, go to his SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/son-of-old. I'm going to buy him a fucking redirect URL actually. I think that's driving me mad saying that every week. Anyway, yeah, go to YouTube, go to the website, all of that. Cheers.
तेरा घूंघटा